gentlemen, my name is Tony Ernest and I am the product specialist for this video, and today in this video we're going to go over adjustment layers. So adjustment layers are a great way for you to adjust color and look and feel of what your image is going to work with. It also allows you to also maybe color balance. If you're doing some compositing, it allows you to match a lot of the color that may be coming in with particular images. So we're just going to go over a lot of the basics with adjustment layers. And some of them actually will overlap, so you'll see that some layers do overlap. You'll get a little bit better range or a more simplistic range. It just depends on what your skill level or what you're trying to pull and how easy you want to pull that out. So with this particular image, I can say, all right, so we have this top row with a lot of different ones with like brightness and contrast, levels, curves, exposure, and vibrant. So you have a choice of how you want to go about doing this. So if you're very simplistic, you can easily go with a brightness and contrast, which will allow you to readjust these in different ways. Of course, with contrast, you're able to pull out the bigger range between the lights and the darks. So if this is going to bring a little bit more black and light into the whole thing, or you can bring it down to more of a contrast, which is going to make it look a lot more flatter range between the two. So you have a different style with that to go with. Now you can do a very similar style with, okay, let's take out this brightness here. Again, you can easily bring out a little bit more deliberate style with a little bit with the curves here, which you can bring on all the darks along with the light, but then you can also bring up the light and just add a little bit more freedom to your adjustments. And just each one represents something a little bit different. So you're able to do some really extreme stuff. So I can easily bring this down and then bring the darks up and make a solarization, so to speak, which is almost an inversion, but it's not really, style with everything, and just give it a different look altogether. So with hue and saturation, you can easily bring in some different color or intensify certain colors. So I can easily bring in the saturation this way and add in a little bit more of a hue, change the hue the way I want to. I'll also readjust the lighting if I want to, so if I want to make it darker or lighter. One of the cooler parts that I enjoy this is you're able to colorize this, which is allowing you to make a monochromatic color-based system. So this is all going to have just one base color, and then I can easily bring in that saturation and then readjust the color the way I want to. So this is a great way if you have something that you are just changing the overall look and feel of a car or a flower or a sweater or a shirt or something along those lines. I usually use a colorization of that point, so I'm able to mask out all the points where that I don't want my my properties to this adjustment layer to affect, and then from there I'm able to readjust just the certain points and so forth. So another thing that the hue and saturation can do is you can actually remove a saturation from the actual effect and make a very easy and bland black and white photo. But I usually prefer to use more of the color range system, especially when it comes to more in-depth photos with a lot more situations of colors going on. So in this case, it's not going to be that kind of crazy. But from here, like, I'm not going to be able to readjust any reds or yellows. It's mostly going to be in these areas with the cyans and the blues, so I can easily readjust certain areas to bring certain tints and shades out to make it a bit more dynamic depending on what's going on with the situation. So to give you an example of the difference between the twos of just pulling out the saturation, that's one thing for this full color layer here, or if I do the black and white, looks very similar. But from here I can actually go into my reds and just find the reds that will pull out in certain areas. So in this case I can reduce the red in the area so that the light is not so prominent, and then I can readjust it so that certain areas there. So if I reduce the reds pretty well, make it a little bit lighter, just different ways of me to readjust everything here. So if I scale this back and forth, I can see where the greens are being affected, so this helps me work that out. Same thing with the cyans or the blues. Well, these actually are cyans, so I can go for a different look and feel of the way things are. So if I toggle this, you can see that there is a huge stark difference between just pulling out the saturation and not having, and just use the black and white filter adjustment layer and so forth. All adjustment layers are affected by the hierarchy, very similar to this one right here. So you're able to see that there is a hue and saturation. So the bottom one's going to take effect before the top one goes into play. And then you'll see that when this is pulled out of all that saturation, this is not really going to affect the next layer. But if I pull that out, you can see where that situation has been affected. So you may have to play around with your hierarchy with that. Also, you can readjust your opacity as well. So if you need to say, I want to reduce a little bit of have a little bit of a color coming through, but have that same effect going on, I can reduce the opacity of the layer, and it gives you a little bit more of a dynamic range, or just add a little bit of color to the mix because you're reducing that ability of that filter use throughout. Or I can actually go into here and actually use my blending modes as well to affect what my adjustment layer is going to affect and so forth. So you have those abilities there to do everything you need when it comes to those. So ultimately, if once you're done and then you want to actually make it a flat image, you can always right click here, make it a flat image, which is going to affect everything. So if I flatten image, it's going to ask me if I want to discard any hidden layers. In this case, I can say yes, and it automatically flattens that image. It would apply, and then that's kind of permanent, or unless you control Z out of that, and that's perfectly fine there. So much like with the rest of Photoshop, if you want to experiment with your adjustment layers, I would suggest doing so. Like play around with the hierarchy, playing around with everything else, that's the best way to do it. So one more thing I wanted to bring up when it comes to the adjustment layers. So we're going to readjust this so that it's not so scary looking. Whew. There we go. We're going to just readjust her. I'm going to really focus more on her. So there's a way for you to isolate any of your adjustment layers when it comes to certain hierarchies. So in this case, I have 2 layers. I'm going to take this away for right now. There we go. So I want to have this hierarchy here, and I want this front photo to be affected and not the following back photo or the background. So I can always go into my adjustment layers, and there's a little box right here. This little box allows you to create a clipping mask, and what that means is anything tied to a clipping mask will only affect what's adjacent to that layer. So this black and white photo here will only be affected by this layer. You can create multiple clipping masks if you need to. So the more you add in, the more it's going to add to the clipping mask itself. So if I say I want to now, for some reason, I want to colorize this, give it a little bit more different style of color, I can, and then you can readjust from there and so forth. So there's always that there to readjust. And then finally, here they always come with a final alpha layer, so you can create a mask for each one. So if I want to readjust this again, I can easily readjust that layer with no problems. All right, once again, my name is Tony Renas, and this has been Adjustment Layers in Photoshop.